Marty Lagina has finally opened what could be Oak Island's $350 million hidden chamber, exposing a concealed underground space that may hold the most important evidence yet. In the search for the island's legendary treasure, this isn't simply another theory built around a promising signal, an unexplained anomaly, or a fragment recovered from a drill hole. This time, the investigation has reached a physical underground feature that can be examined directly, giving the team a chance to determine whether it was deliberately constructed to conceal something valuable. This is The Curse of Oak Island Season 13, and the finale is where the significance of the latest discoveries finally comes into focus. What did Marty and the team find when they reached this hidden chamber? Why could its contents be connected to a treasure potentially worth $350 million? And what does the evidence actually prove? That is what this story is about. To understand how the team reached this extraordinary underground discovery, we have to go back to the clues that first pointed them toward it. The first thing that makes this discovery so important is the location itself. Oak Island has never been short of mysterious places. The money pit has dominated the investigation for generations. The swamp has produced strange structures and traces of human activity. The shoreline has raised questions about possible construction. And now, another underground feature has given the team a reason to reconsider how the island's different discoveries may fit together. For centuries, treasure hunters approached Oak Island with one basic assumption. Somewhere beneath the island was something valuable. But finding the exact location has always been the problem. The legendary money pit was supposedly discovered more than 2 centuries ago, after reports of unusual ground and underground structures attracted early searchers. What followed was a cycle of digging, flooding, collapse, and renewed speculation. The deeper the searchers went, the more difficult the excavation became. And that difficulty created one of the most enduring theories surrounding Oak Island. Someone had supposedly constructed an elaborate system to protect whatever had been hidden underground. If that theory was correct, then the island was not simply a place where somebody buried something. It was a place where somebody deliberately designed a hiding place. That distinction changes everything. A simple burial could be concealed with a few feet of soil. A sophisticated underground chamber would require planning. It would require labor. It would require tools. And if the chamber was protected by tunnels or flooding systems, it would require an even greater level of engineering. So the central question becomes obvious. What could possibly have been important enough to justify all of that effort? That question has produced almost every major theory connected to Oak Island. Some believe the island could have been used by pirates. Others have proposed Portuguese or Spanish explorers. Some theories involve lost religious artifacts, and one of the most persistent possibilities connects the island to the Knights Templar. But none of these theories can be established, simply because an unusual structure has been discovered. A structure is evidence of construction. It is not automatically evidence of treasure. That is why the latest investigation matters. The team is no longer relying entirely on old stories. They are examining physical evidence. They can test wood. They can analyze metals. They can map underground structures. They can date artifacts. And they can compare discoveries from different parts of the island. This gives the investigation something earlier treasure hunters never had. A way to test the mystery. And that is exactly what Marty Lagina and the team have been doing. One of the most significant areas of Season 13 was Lot 8. For much of the investigation, this part of the island remained another location, where the team knew something unusual might be happening beneath the surface. Then they encountered an enormous boulder. It was not an ordinary object. The team estimated that it weighed roughly 40,000 pounds. Moving something that massive required a major effort. But the reason they were willing to do it was simple. They wanted to know what was underneath, and when the boulder was finally removed, the team encountered evidence of a man-made feature below it. That discovery immediately changed the investigation. Because a deliberately constructed underground feature creates a very different set of questions from a natural geological anomaly. If the feature was built by people, then somebody chose the location. Somebody decided how deep to dig. Somebody created the structure, and somebody had a reason for doing it. The challenge now is determining what that reason was. Could it have been a shaft, a tunnel, a storage area, an access point, or something more significant? Could it have been part of a system designed to conceal valuable material? That possibility is what turns the discovery into a potential hidden chamber mystery. But there is an important distinction. The evidence has not established that a $350 million fortune has been recovered. The figure is part of the dramatic treasure premise surrounding the investigation. The real question is whether the physical evidence could eventually support the possibility of an extremely valuable deposit. And that is where the investigation becomes much more interesting, because value is not the first thing the team needs to establish. They need to establish location, then construction, then age, then purpose, then contents, and finally, origin. That is the chain of evidence required to transform an exciting discovery into a historical conclusion. And the first link in that chain is the physical structure. If the structure is genuinely ancient, that matters. If it predates the major treasure hunts, that matters even more. And if it contains material that can be dated to the same period, the connection becomes stronger. This is why archaeology is so important to the Oak Island investigation. An artifact found by itself can create excitement. An artifact found inside a sealed structure can create context. And context is what allows investigators to reconstruct the past. That principle also applies to the money pit. During Season 13, the team continued investigating the money pit area using MP1, a large caisson designed to reach deep underground. The goal was not simply to dig deeper. The team wanted to investigate the suspected solution channel and determine whether the underground environment contained evidence of earlier activity. The excavation eventually reached bedrock at approximately 210 feet. It did not produce the spectacular treasure recovery that many viewers might have expected, but it did produce information, and information is what allows investigators to choose their next target. Among the material recovered was wood. That may sound ordinary, but underground wood has become one of the more interesting forms of evidence on Oak Island. Why? Because wood can preserve traces of the environment in which it existed. If precious metals were dissolved in groundwater, organic material could potentially retain some of those chemical signatures. That led the team to conduct further laboratory analysis. During the finale, 15 wood samples were processed. One of the most notable results came from Shaft 2A. The sample from that location produced the highest silver reading and the third highest gold reading among the samples tested. That does not prove that a $350 million treasure is sitting beneath Shaft 2A, but it does something important. It identifies an area worthy of further investigation. And that is how the modern Oak Island search increasingly works. The team gathers data, they compare locations, they identify anomalies, then they return to the areas where the evidence is strongest. The process is much more systematic than simply digging wherever a treasure legend says something might be buried. That is why the hidden chamber theory is so interesting. A chamber provides a physical target. It gives the team somewhere specific to investigate. And if the chamber is connected to other structures, it could reveal the architecture of the underground system. That could potentially explain why earlier searches repeatedly failed. Perhaps the treasure was never directly beneath the original money pit. Perhaps the money pit was an access point. Perhaps it was a decoy. Perhaps the actual storage area was offset. Or perhaps the island contains several different structures built during different periods. At this stage, all of those possibilities remain open, but the existence of man-made underground features means they can at least be investigated, and that is a major difference. For centuries, Oak Island was dominated by speculation. Now the team can test physical evidence. This is also where the historical theories become relevant. If a structure is ancient, Who could have built it? If artifacts are found inside, where did they originate? If the construction techniques resemble structures elsewhere, is there a historical connection? These questions are especially important because Season 13 expanded the investigation beyond Nova Scotia. The team traveled to the Azores to examine structures that they believed might have similarities to features found on Oak Island. The official Season 13 material also explored possible Portuguese and Knights Templar connections. Those discoveries not prove that the Templars came to Oak Island, but they give the team another historical possibility to test. And testing is the key word. A theory can be exciting. Evidence has to be measurable. Suppose a structure on Oak Island resembles an old structure in the Azores. The next question is whether the resemblance is meaningful. Was it built using the same technique? Was it constructed during the same historical period? Was there a plausible route for people to travel between the locations? And is there additional evidence connecting them? Without those answers, the similarity remains interesting but inconclusive. This is why the hidden chamber could become so important. If it contains material that independently supports one of these historical connections, then the structure could become the missing link. Imagine finding a chamber containing artifacts from a clearly identifiable period. Now imagine those artifacts can be traced to a particular region. Suddenly, the historical possibilities is narrow. If those objects also show signs of deliberate concealment, the evidence becomes even stronger. And if valuable material is found alongside them, the treasure theory gains another piece of support. But again, the chamber itself is only the beginning. Opening it would not automatically solve Oak Island. The contents would have to be examined carefully. The surrounding soil would have to be documented. The construction would have to be preserved, and every artifact would need to be studied in context. That may sound less dramatic than opening a treasure chest, but it is far more important, because the real objective is not just to find something valuable. It is to prove what happened. Who built the chamber? When was it built? What was placed inside and why? Those answers could potentially solve more of the mystery than the value of the treasure itself. This is also why the $350 million number needs to be treated carefully. Evaluation is not proof. Even if an enormous amount of precious metal were discovered, its actual value would depend on what was recovered, its purity, its historical significance, and the circumstances surrounding it. A single artifact could be worth more historically than its raw material value. A collection of rare objects could be priceless to historians, and a large quantity of ordinary material could be worth far less than the headline suggests. So the number is ultimately secondary. The location is what matters, and the evidence is what determines whether that location is significant. That is why the discovery beneath the boulder on Lot 8 is so intriguing. It gives investigators another piece of the island's physical map. For years, the search has involved scattered clues. Now the team can begin asking whether those clues align. Does the structure on Lot 8 relate to the money pit? Does it connect to other underground features? Does its construction date match the artifacts found elsewhere? Could it represent a separate phase of activity? Those questions may eventually reveal whether Oak Island contains one mystery or several. That possibility is important, because the island has clearly been used and altered by many generations. Treasure hunters have dug there repeatedly. Modern investigators have drilled hundreds of holes. Structures have collapsed. Soil has moved. Objects may have been displaced. Any serious archaeological interpretation must account for all of that. A chamber found today is not automatically preserved exactly as its original builders left it. The team must establish whether it has been disturbed. If it has not, the evidence becomes much more valuable. A sealed space can preserve context, and context is what the Oak Island investigation has often lacked. For generations, objects were recovered without reliable records of exactly where they came from. That made interpretation extremely difficult. Modern excavation methods are different. Every layer can be recorded. Every object can be mapped. Every sample can be tested. That gives the team a much better chance of reconstructing the original event. And if the chamber is genuinely sealed, the potential is enormous. A sealed chamber could preserve evidence of its original purpose. It could contain material that has not been disturbed for centuries. It could potentially answer questions about the people who created it. And it could show whether the chamber was designed as a storage space, a passage, or something else entirely. That is why opening a chamber is not necessarily the final moment. It is the beginning of the most important phase. The contents have to be interpreted, and interpretation requires patience. Imagine that the first object recovered is a piece of metal. The team cannot simply declare it treasure. They need to identify it, determine its age, determine where it was manufactured, and determine whether it belongs to the original construction period. Now imagine the next object is a coin that could provide a date. But again, the coin could have been lost long after the chamber was built. So investigators need multiple pieces of evidence. That is how the case becomes stronger. One artifact supports another, the dates align, the construction fits, the location makes sense, the historical records provide a plausible explanation. Eventually, the pieces begin to reinforce each other. That is the kind of evidence that could transform Oak Island. And this is where Marty Lagina's role becomes especially important. Marty has repeatedly emphasized the need to understand the physical evidence, rather than simply chase the most exciting theory. The team has to follow the data. If the data leads somewhere unexpected, they have to follow it. If the data disproves a theory, they have to reconsider it. That is what makes the current phase of the investigation different. The goal is no longer simply to find treasure. The goal is to establish what the island actually contains. And that is why the hidden chamber matters. It represents a possible place where the physical evidence and the historical theories could finally meet. If the chamber is empty, that tells the team something. If it contains ordinary material, that tells them something else. If it contains ancient artifacts, the investigation becomes much more interesting. And if it contains valuable material with a clear historical context, the mystery could finally approach a genuine breakthrough. That is the possibility behind the $350 million headline. Not that the team has already recovered a fortune, but that the investigation may finally be reaching the kind of physical evidence that could prove whether such a fortune ever existed. And after centuries of searching, that distinction matters. The island has produced countless theories, but theories are easy to create. Evidence is much harder. That is why the chamber is potentially more important than another signal. A signal can disappear. A chamber can be documented. A metal reading can have multiple explanations. A constructed structure has a physical history. A rumor can survive for centuries. A sealed chamber can be opened and examined. That is what makes the current investigation so compelling. The team is moving closer to something that can actually answer questions. And the next question is perhaps the biggest of all. What if the chamber is not isolated? What if it connects to another underground feature? What if it leads toward the money pit? What if it is part of a larger system? That would fundamentally change the way Oak Island is understood. The island could contain an underground network designed around concealment. One area could serve as an entrance. Another could contain storage. Another could redirect water. And another could conceal the actual deposit. This would explain why previous searches repeatedly came close without finding the final answer. They may have been attacking one part of a much larger structure again. That remains a hypothesis, but the physical evidence makes it possible to investigate. And that is the important change. The mystery is becoming testable. Season 13 also produced another intriguing clue in the form of a Portuguese coin dated to the 14th century. The coin's dating was narrowed to approximately 1369 to 1371. That is remarkably old. But its presence does not automatically establish a medieval treasure connection. The key question is how it reached Oak Island. Was it brought there during the medieval period? Was it carried across the Atlantic much later? Was it lost? Was it deliberately deposited? Each possibility produces a completely different historical interpretation. And that is why artifacts cannot be viewed in isolation. Their context matters. The same is true for the chamber. If an old object is found inside a modern disturbance, its historical value may be limited. If the same object is found inside an undisturbed structure from the same period, its significance could be enormous. This is what the team has to establish. And if they succeed, the chamber could become the strongest physical evidence yet that Oak Island's underground mystery is based on deliberate human activity. That still would not prove a $350 million treasure, but it would prove something important. Someone built something beneath the island, and if that structure was created to hide something, then the question of what was hidden becomes much more serious. This is where the legendary treasure stories begin to intersect with archaeology. The old stories describe something valuable. The physical evidence suggests deliberate construction. The laboratory results suggest unusual concentrations of precious metals in certain underground material. Historical artifacts suggest that people from distant regions may have reached the island. None of those discoveries is decisive on its own, but together, they create a pattern that deserves further investigation, and that is precisely what Season 13 has accomplished. It has not necessarily solved the mystery, it has narrowed it. The team now has specific areas to investigate, specific structures to study, specific material to test, and specific historical theories to examine. That is progress. The gold maple leaf used to mark a future drilling location at the end of the finale is perhaps the clearest symbol of that progress. The investigation is not ending. It is becoming more targeted. The team has identified where it wants to look next, and that next excavation could be extremely important. If it reaches another chamber, the investigation could accelerate. If it reaches a tunnel, the team could potentially map a larger underground system. If it recovers more precious metal evidence, the theory could strengthen. And if it finds nothing, the team will have to reassess. Either way, the evidence wins. That is the only way the Oak Island mystery can ultimately be solved. And perhaps that is why the idea of Marty Lagina finally opening the hidden chamber is so powerful. The image is dramatic, but the reality could be even more significant. The chamber may represent a physical boundary between speculation and evidence. On one side are the centuries of stories. On the other side is whatever the island actually contains. When that boundary is opened, the evidence gets the final word. And what happens after that could determine the future of the entire investigation. If the contents identify a historical group, the team can begin tracing their movements. If the material reveals a specific date, researchers can examine what was happening during that period. If precious metals are discovered, the team can determine their source. If documents or symbols appear, the historical implications could become enormous. And if everything points toward one coherent explanation, Oak Island could finally have something it has never had before, a documented answer. That would be more valuable than any treasure valuation, because it would solve the central mystery. Who came here? Why? What did they hide? And why did they believe Oak Island could protect it? Those are the questions that have survived every failed excavation. They have survived collapses, flooding, financial losses, changing theories, and generations of treasure hunters. Now, the modern investigation may finally be approaching the physical evidence needed to answer them. But there is still a long way to go. A chamber must be properly identified. Its construction must be understood, its contents must be analyzed, and its historical context must be established. Until that happens, the $350 million treasure remains a possibility rather than a proven fact. But the possibility is exactly what keeps the investigation moving. Because if the strongest evidence is now pointing toward a specific underground structure, the next phase could be unlike anything that came before. The team will not simply be searching, they will be testing a location. And that is a very different kind of investigation. For centuries, Oak Island was a mystery without a confirmed center. Now there may finally be a physical structure capable of becoming that center. A chamber, a tunnel, a shaft, a hidden space beneath the ground. And if that space contains evidence of deliberate concealment, then the island's history could begin to unfold. in a way that no previous generation of treasure hunters could have imagined. The $350 million figure may eventually prove accurate. It may prove exaggerated. Or the actual value may turn out to be irrelevant, compared with the historical importance of what is found. But the real question is not how much the treasure is worth. The real question is what the treasure can tell us. If something valuable was hidden here, someone knew it was valuable. Someone chose this island. Someone constructed the hiding place. Someone expected the secret to survive. And someone almost succeeded. Because centuries later, the team is still trying to understand what happened. Now, however, they have something earlier searchers never had. A growing body of physical evidence. And if Marty Lagina has truly reached the entrance to the hidden chamber, the next discovery could finally reveal whether Oak Island's legendary treasure was ever more than a legend. The answer may be waiting inside the structure. And after centuries of searching, that could be the moment when Oak Island's greatest secret finally begins to speak for itself.